Jazakallah Khatija for that. So I think that alone will tell you that the speakers today are at the forefront of advocacy and action in the humanitarian space in South Africa. We're just one of few. There are hundreds of other females in South Africa doing exceptional work, but unfortunately, all of us couldn't have been here today. Before we delve into solutions, because that's what we are about as women, yes, we do complain and we find the crisis and we find all the issues, but we also solution-driven. We want to solve the problem. I'm going to just ask Zahira to briefly outline what she believes the role of women in the humanitarian sector really is about.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. It's an absolute pleasure and an honor to share this platform with such phenomenal speakers. Is that better? Okay, Jazakallah. Absolute honor to share this platform with such phenomenal speakers, and I think we've been given such an insight into the humanitarian field. The one thing that has come up strongly is I think no matter where our discussion goes, I don't think it's predominantly just for women. I think it would impact men and women regardless when you're in this field. However, the one thing that has come up from the time we had our opening talk right up until the end was that the amount of women and children that are always affected is disproportionate. We've seen that right at the outset. We cannot only have males in a field going out impacting humanitarian work without having, with no disrespect, but not having the empathy or the ability to be able to have discussions around reproductive health, around GBV, around difficulties that women would be able to not be able to share that on a platform with a male, but would be far more comfortable with a female in that space. So I think in terms of a woman's space in a humanitarian field, it's just as important as a male's, but you need the compassion, you need the advocacy, you also need the insight and compassion as to how it impacts women. From what we've seen on the local field, on the ground here, when you're going into communities and you're doing work, when you help women in the communities, and I'm not just talking about skills training and that, there's so much more to that, but when you impact women, you change the face of communities because women will know how to stretch that budget for the month. They'll know how to make sure the neighbors have got food on their table. They'll make sure they're part of the community networks, the ECD training, they're making sure the clinics are sorted out. So they're an imperative part, not just only on the beneficiary rights holders, but also on the part of implementation.
Most definitely. So Zahira will concur with me, and so will Khadija. Those skills often come from our roles as mothers. Aside from for ourselves, taking care of ourselves, we run the home, we see to the kids, we see to the needs of the male in the home, we see to, if we're working or educated, we see to those needs. So hence, we do it best. Am I right, Khadija?
Absolutely. I think that as women, I was just having a discussion earlier with someone. Often, you know, corporates and leaders of organizations, if a woman falls pregnant, then they're home for about 4 to 6 months and they're like, oh my goodness, now I have to, my chief XYZ. So when women are exceptional, the loss is really, really great during that period. But there is an ability to manage, have a support system, be able to provide some sort of guidelines for what you anticipate at home. Yes, indeed, sometimes it can pose to be a little bit difficult, but coming out of a 5-year career where I was on the road 80% of the time and 20% at home, I made sure that being a mother was a priority, making sure that my kids had my mother around. My brother was there all the time from an Islamic perspective. And I think that outside of that, we are not only mothers to our own flesh and blood, we are mothers to a community, we are mothers to children outside of the community. So you see one child hungry or 5 children hungry, you're not going to feed the one, you're going to feed all 5. If you see one wet nose, you're going to put them all through some medication or something. So that is just inherent in us as women. And we find a way to balance it. We can do it all. Nobody says that we can't. And yes, we take a lot on, and it does bring a lot of undue pressure, perhaps. But we can still be the wife, the mother, the daughter, everything that you need us to be, we can, and we can be exceptional leaders in the space that we operate in. So I just think that I don't think we underestimate it anymore. And I believe as women, and I'm talking to these beautiful women from all parts of the world, I salute you. It's not easy, but you can do whatever you put your mind to. Alhamdulillah.
So I think the next question would be how does the involvement of women in the delivery of aid enhance the effectiveness of humanitarian assistance? But you've briefly touched on that. Often I know when Maulana's returned from certain assignments, especially in disaster cases, particularly the Turkey earthquake, he said to us when he got back that there was so much that they could do as males out on the ground. The victims in most cases are females. And as males, there's very little. Besides being an observer, you can't offer the comfort and the emotional support that they require at that time. So that's another role that we fill and that we need to maximize to our potential. Yes, there are always limitations. In anything we do in life, there'll always be a limitation. But we work around the situation and do it to the best of our ability.
I think coming into that, I've actually got an example for you. I was in Turkey when the Syrian war had taken place and a lot of the refugees were being moved. And we spoke earlier about the Muakha project. And here you got to see it in action where Palestinians and Syrians were looking after one family after another. Once they settled the one family, they looked after another. And we were visiting the homes of many of these families and individuals. And as you spoke earlier, where women were now thrust into roles that were not generally theirs to be taking on. They were not meant to be the providers and protectors of their families. And yet we had men here who had gone through severe trauma because of the current war situation in Syria, were lying in their beds, unable to do anything, and the mothers were running homes, looking after their families, being providers in a foreign country, and trying to still keep up with that. And the one thing that always stood out for me is we went to see the one home, and it was young children. And this mother is literally running 3 jobs in a day. She comes home just to see her kids when they come back from school, and then goes back for another job. And as the team walked out of the house, she held me back and she stopped me. And I thought, I don't even understand what she's saying because we don't speak the same language. And she asked me just to wait behind. And when I stood behind, she lifted up her abaya and showed me cigarette burn marks all over her body from her incarceration. And when you think that this is things that we just hear about, these are the realities that women are facing, that they may never be comfortable to have that conversation with anyone else at the table. And as women, we can bring that perspective because you hold their hands along those journeys. You're there for these women as they go through that, and we know the reality that women face and the vulnerability that we come with. So as much as we speak about the strength of women, I think one of the things is, and I'm very proud to acknowledge the number of men in South Africa that sit on boards that give us those spaces that we don't hold token positions. We hold very vocal positions on our boards and who ensure that the woman's vulnerability is never just seen as a weakness. It's seen as a strength to build up so that we can have a source of providing more safe spaces for women.
No, absolutely. And I think just to add to that, outside of the international war and crime areas, right here at home, just across the way in Mitchell's Plain, part of my work is a small foundation there. And those who are engrossed in drugs and poverty, mothers are at a point where they are not prepared to kill a pet, but they're prepared to put their children in jail or have them unalive because of the dire environment that they are living in. And taking those kids out of that environment and bringing them back into that environment does not help because they will get stuck in the same social circles. So some of the humanitarian work, also the work that we do, is where mothers are gang raped by their own children's people. Some of these women their kids are stealing their medication to buy drugs. So apart from that, the poverty issue, not only in South Africa, but on the continent, relative to food security, relative to energy security, water security, which is big apex matters that we have to address. But the little matters is the daily bread matters that costs us alive every single day. And that's what we face as those who are grounded and as women. They will only come to us and say, I don't know what to do. Should I have my child arrested? What do I do with my son? What do I do with my daughter? Sister, help me. How do I get myself out of the situation? Can I put him in rehab? Where is the next step? I am lost. I don't want to be alive. And from a, not only humanity perspective, but ethically, how do you then provide any type of emotional support? And this is what we women do. And the next question I would like to ask is, how do we then, you are giants, all of you, how do you deal coming back from such an environment, coming home and re-establishing yourself in that home as if you've not ever seen any of this happen? How do you live a normal life? And that is also something that we must ask ourselves. How do we ensure that those who are in this work have got regular access to somebody to speak to help you, re-establish yourselves at home in a normal setting? So inshallah, we've
So
got lots of work.
Khadija, I think she has some insight into all the questions I've jotted down because my next question is, how do we as aid workers, I mean, it's a challenge. When we go out and look at the poverty around us, the disaster when disaster strikes, how do we then come home and deal with the impact that it has on us emotionally and our mental health and our mental state and continue our daily tasks to get back into action, having seen what we saw and go forward from there?
So I think, we've, and this goes for the men and the women in this audience, I think especially in the humanitarian field, we wear burnout like a badge of honor. And it's really actually a disservice that we're doing to other people and to ourselves because we can't keep pouring from an empty cup. We have to be able to take that time out to be able to heal, to have the necessary psychosocial support services available, because when you see things, it's really difficult to kind of walk away from it and go, I'll go home and I'll switch off. For women, we don't think in silos. We can't separate it. I know men have an easier way, Malana, of being able to do that, where when you go to work, it's focused on work and you can leave home stuff behind. With women, we take everything with us. We take our home life, our family, our children, our communities, everything that we see, and we never get a chance to be able to separate that. So my answer to you is, I don't think you balance. I think you juggle. But I think you also, as a human being, need to know when you have to step back. You have to be able to have really good mental health awareness, good mindfulness, to be able to understand when you need to take a break, when you need to be able to pause, when you need to understand that you've got to do something for yourself to be okay before you can come back in and you can give in the situation. I think one of the previous speakers mentioned giving and being part of humanitarian work is not something that we wake up one day and go, this is where we are. But I think it's innate in every single one of us. As Muslims, you're raised with service. You're raised with giving back. Your obligations to your community, your obligations to the people around us, the obligations to the ummah. It's part of who we are. It's an inextricable part of our identity. But if that service is not of benefit and doing far more harm, you have to be able to take a step back to heal yourself. So I think it's imperative that organizations do cater for psychosocial support. And I'm not just saying this for the woman, but for the men as well. We've seen enough men who've come out of relief aspects or who've gone into disaster zones and have struggled tremendously with being able to cope with what they're seeing, because we don't adequately prepare people for this. And we also say to men, just go in and be strong, and there's no outlet for that. So there has to be a balance of psychosocial support for men and for women as well.
I think Zaira has really said it the way it should be. So for me, the takeaway line when I go out, every time I do go out onto the field, recently it hasn't been very much because I have a good team out on the ground, is that first I make dua that Allah never put me on the receiving end and always put me on the giving end. To see people in the situation, nobody's happy waiting in line for a food parcel, or I wonder what dignity a person has standing there to receive basic food items. So that's the first thing I always do. But the second thing is, when I go home, I always, before I get to bed, I think, how can we take this person out of a poverty situation to the one who is now going to be giving charity, not receiving charity? I think going forward, obviously we'll never find a solution to this, but we need to find short-term solutions to empower people for the long term.
No, that is actually the crux of why we're here, is to empower women, right? So, and that's beautiful, because ultimately it's something that government, our South African government has really worked on. We've written what we call the broad-based Black economic empowerment policy. We've also written a preferential procurement policy, and what that intends to do is it intends to ensure that women, youth, people living with disabilities have access to contract subcontracts from government at any given time through a certain process which is in line with the legislation. Now, what we can do, Sabira, is within ourselves, within this organization, we can create an incubator. And what that incubator is put ladies or disadvantaged individuals or those who have nothing who need to start again through a process. And that process is where you start a business, you deal with the compliance, your tax certificates, BE, SARS, and all of those other aspects, or cooperative, or a joint venture, or a partnership, or whatever you'd want to do. Bring in women, put them in a body, provide them with the access to skills, access to a certain type of information to help them take their business forward, and then access to markets. And you are the market in itself. We all needed these badges and these lanyards. Women can sew. Whether you're taught it's inherent in you, you can sew. You know how to sew. We need scarves. Everybody is wearing Palestinian scarves. We need jackets, whatever. And that's just the one side, textile. There's so many other sectors that women can offer. But allow whatever our procurement budget is out of your NGOs, look at that. That's what I did when I was in finance. I took the province's procurement budget, I listed the top 10 most procured items, and I said we are going to transform these areas. We are going to make sure that Free Staters, women, youth have access to provide us with this specific service. And once we are conscious about that, we can be conscious to say that woman that was in destitute, over a period of 12 to 18 months, we took her from point A to point C. Or point F, and establish this ecosystem and a pay-it-forward system. So once you've been established, you move it forward to the next sister and the following young person and the following person. And so it will just multiply, and it will make sure that many other individuals have access to the same opportunities as the one sister has had.
I just want to add to that, but firstly, I have to say you clearly haven't seen my sewing skills if you think it's innate.
Mine as well.
Really
Eh?
isn't. I think the one thing is we talk about skills development, and skills development is definitely something that most of the NPOs are moving towards in terms of ensuring that we're teaching people how to get their own food. We're teaching them how to fish instead of just providing a fish. However, the one thing, and I know this came in a discussion you and I had earlier today, we're doing skills development training, but we're not taking people to market. We're not actually utilizing it to say, here's the markets that we're opening up to you. Simple things, if we're doing hydroponic farming, have we sourced a buyer for it? There are enough people in our areas, enough stores in our areas that you can actually set up a purchasing thing with them to be able to supply it. The second thing is that with women especially in the supply chain, nobody can survive waiting 30 days for payment. And we have to find a way to be able to bridge that so women are able to continue their businesses and we're not impacting on supply chain and impacting on financial turnovers. Because these are talking about small businesses and not big corporates that have that kind of fluid cash around to be able to wait for it. And then the last thing is, as we were saying, also incorporate, in addition to your skills development training, basic business skills. I've seen women running home industries and never taking into account the fact that they have to pay themselves a salary. They have got no value for what their own time and effort is. Taking into account basics like electricity. We talk as NPOs, we sit here, we know about SARS, we know about our PBOs, we know about Section 18, we know the current new charters that have been coming out and the new bills that are impacting NPOs in our country. But the truth of it is, the person sitting at the end of the table who we're trying to help doesn't even understand what it means when we say, don't go and take a loan. Interest will kill you. It's going to sink your business. These are things that when you're doing skills development training, basic business training should go hand in hand with that as well.
Just one thing, I want to congratulate Ashraful Aid, Maulana. Your humanitarian store is exquisite, and that gives dignity to women. And I must say that is something that was very heartfelt when I saw it. So instead of providing women with a truckload of things that you're just offering and somebody grabs and takes whatever would suit them, these women have got access to go to a store that is called the Ashraful Aid Humanitarian Store and pick out things that they need. And that is a huge contrast to how we deal with humanitarian aid. Jazakallah for that. I thought I'd just talk.
So just going back to the skills development you mentioned, in your delegate bags today, most of you would have received a little shoe bag. And that, as a showcase of the Ashraful Aid Ulwazi Skills Center at our Lenasia branch, we just thought it was key to show the potential of women that has been sown by students of the Skills Center, the orange little bag in. So it was sown by the students of the Ulwazi Skills Center, who I think Zaira, you and I need to visit that center because most of those who came through there didn't know how to sew. So alhamdulillah.
We'll be joining that
But,
class.
but Mulana and I often have this discussion that how do we then take these students, I know Mulana Ahmed and I are part of that, how do we then take these graduates of that center and create businesses out of them or create them to become self-sustaining individuals? And that is often the challenge which we face. But I mean, Khadija has been addressing that it's all well and good giving them the skill or giving them some kind of potential to bring in an income, but we can't just leave them as a graduate. We then need to follow through. And it's initiatives like our microfinance and other initiatives where we can then take them to the next level. We often find with the microfinance initiative where, like you said, individuals don't have basic financial skills, let alone, we're not even talking about the business skill yet, but basic financial skills. Because if they are doing sales of 1,000 Rand, they're eating 800 Rand of that for the day in their personal living expenses before they start to put aside money. And that's the struggle, that's the reality. So we need to, and 90% of the time out there, those women are single-headed homes who are feeding more than 6 to 8 individuals on a daily basis.
I think just to touch on and to come on that, I think, Khadija, you mentioned very nicely about giving with dignity and these humanitarian stores. And I think it's something that we have to recognize, and it's imperative that we know this when we go into areas. We live in such a diverse country that has various cultures, various religions, and we have to be tolerant of it. But you can't be tolerant of it if you don't understand it and you don't know it. You have to take the responsibility of learning about it before you go out. One of the things that I feel very strongly about is when we take away the dignity of the recipients and the rights holders. So if you go into many areas, we know the fathers are usually the heads of these households in many of our areas. And we go and we give hampers in front of the children, in front of his wife. We're taking away his dignity as being the breadwinner of that family, as being the provider of that family. And I think we have to relook at how we do this from humanitarian perspectives, from NPOs, that even if you have a place separate from that where people can come pick up their packs and still go home, whether male or female, who are the providers to their family, and still be seen as that role of being a provider to their family and not their children looking at them as we have had to wait for a handout. So I think in addition to the stores that we've got, dignity needs to be an imperative part of the charity that we do. As Muslims, we need to be giving dignity, not taking away dignity.
No, definitely. Just to move on, when I was put into the role as a KZN coordinator for Ashraful Aid about 2.5 years ago, I actually had a few calls to commend at that point, we were not known to KwaZulu-Natal at all. And those that knew me wanted to know who our CEO was, who were we, the organization that was really not in Gauteng, they were well known, but not. And to commend us for putting a female to head the organization. Predominantly in KwaZulu-Natal, I think I was probably one of the first few that was put into a leadership role of that sort. And yes, the first 6 months were difficult to break into that organizational mentality that a female should not be at the helm of the institute. But I think it's a challenge going forward. We do have the potential, and it's every one of us, every one of you sitting here today has a potential, and we all have different potentials. I believe Mohammed said something about how, when I just stepped out of the room, about what an introvert he was. I mean, when he started talking, I was thinking back to the little boy that I recall. And we both grew up in a little town, and I also was that introvert. But when you go out into the world, you learn, the opportunities that they are there. We all have the potential, we just need to unleash it in the right way.
No, I agree, and I'm going to be very personal about this. So I think as young girls in a Muslim home, you're raised to be subservient and very shy. But I can tell you the biggest driver of who I am today was my dad, Rahmatullah alayh. So it was a male figure in my life that pushed me forward and said, my girl, go and do what you need to do. And going forward in all of the work that I do, so many males who have been mentors or coaches too, alhamdulillah, in a very good, honest way, have been guides and mentors. So we shouldn't feel like as women that we have to remain in the back end. Sometimes I know when to step back. You get to learn how to step back in an environment where you know, okay, here you may just be pushing something outside of a patriarchy or the customary or traditional mechanisms. But there are certain areas where utilize someone, bring in your brother, bring in that uncle, bring in so and so to help you with this message and with this idea. So I think as leaders, it's female leaders, it's something we learn along the way, alhamdulillah. So to the young ones, this beautiful young lady here, you learn how to manage, how to ensure that you
Multitask.
navigate your way through it,
So,
inshallah.
a few closing remarks from you, and then Khadija.
Sure. I think we need to be constantly conscious of the work that we do. Allah can easily replace any of us. This work is more than just good intention. Many organizations start because you wanted to do good, you wanted to give back, and I think sustainability and longevity of your organizations rely on far more than that. So always be open to learning, always be open to picking up from somebody else to be able to take that. I think we definitely do need far more females in leadership and mentorship positions, and we don't have that. But alhamdulillah, for the males who are willing to share that with us. Brother Faraz, I'm not sure if he's still in the room. I do want to mention, he said there's no sustainability if you don't have volunteers. I work with 28 ladies, and our organization is 29 years old, and every single one is on volunteer basis. And we collaborate with a number of the bigger organizations in this room. And alhamdulillah, for some reason, maybe there needs to be a research study on why this organization works, but it works. And I think we just have to be conscious. If your values and identity are rooted in your religion and you always have an anchor, there's always something to hold on to that gives you your reason, gives you your why you're doing what you're doing, then to answer فَإِنَّ تَذْهَبُونَ where you're going becomes a lot easier.
No, I would agree. And I think we all go back to that same question. What is your purpose? And that purpose then derives the focus going forward, and then also the broader focus in community, in the region, in your continent. And that purpose then also ensures that you do not falter, you stick to the direction in which you are embedded in, and you won't have any players deciding on how you decide for things. Ultimately, we decide for greater humanity for all, alhamdulillah, and that should be the core of how we make all decisions, inshallah.
And for me, I think we, as females, mostly as females, but across the board, we should not let our responsibilities limit our potential. So we are the limits we place on ourselves, certainly. I believe there was a question at the back of the room, if the lady still wants to ask a question.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. I work for an organization called Islamic Relief, and I am very honored to be in this room with our board member on the panel, alhamdulillah. I just wanted to add to the question that you had earlier about how do we assist the care workers or the aid workers going out into the field and being faced with everything that we see. So I work for the orphan sponsorship program within that organization, and we have a lot of care workers. What Islamic Relief has done is that we are actually, we employ, I would say, social workers, and we debrief with each other. So when the care workers come in, it's not such a load. And so for the other organizations, employ a social worker, which I do think we all have within our organizations. And if they can extend themselves just to assist the ladies that go out and are faced with all of these horrid stories that we hear every day. So alhamdulillah, that's what we do.
Alhamdulillah, that's excellent. Shukran for that. We have a few minutes. I know Yusuf is signaling time. If there's any other questions.
Firstly, I want to congratulate and commend our sisters. And of course, yes, also acknowledge the sterling efforts that you do. And I can identify and I know some of the efforts that you're doing. And I can say undoubtedly that our mothers and sisters make some of the best humanitarians. And we congratulate you for that. My beloved sisters, alhamdulillah, this generation of female humanitarians, You are sterling, fantastic, incredible. What programs have you got in place to mentor and train and help the next generation of female humanitarians who will also leave a positive impact in the humanitarian space like yourselves?
Jazakallah Kari. I think it's because of people like Kari we're able to do the work that we do. I think it's imperative, like I mentioned earlier, I think it's an integral part of our identities in terms of giving back. One of the things that we do very strongly in our community is to ensure that we have a kids program affiliated to ours. Not for any other reason except that we want them to see what needs to be done. We can do that work in less time than it takes for us to do it, but we do it in two ways. The first is we try and do most of our activities, especially the community work, around a mosque. Instead of any at a community hall, at a school, we try and do it at the mosque, and we've got great buy-in from our mosque committees in our community. The reason for this is, actually the most important reason for this, is a sense of identity and a sense of belonging. We're finding that children as young as 9 years old are being clinically diagnosed with anxiety, with depression, with having no sense of belonging. We've thought that the moment we link our activities to a mosque, no matter where our children go in the world, they'll always have a sense of belonging and a sense of kinship to the mosque. So that's the first part of it. The second part of it is we get our children involved from a very young age. We get them to come through to pack, whether we're packing sweet hampers, Ramadan hampers, to come out on field work for us. We do cards, Eid card making that we send to refugee camps in Lebanon and to Palestine and to Syria. And the reasoning behind that is they have to understand that there's an obligation as a Muslim individual to give back. And we don't only give back internationally, there's a strong obligation to give back to our neighbors. We're living in a country that has a very strong an imbalance of those that have and those that don't have, and it's only getting worse. So there has to be a strong obligation to be able to give back, to make sure that everybody's got something around them. So we're working very hard on making sure that's done from the time they're kids. So our mums come to our meetings, come to our events, come to anything that we're doing with their children, and our CWF Kids programs operate countrywide.
I'd just like to add in a few seconds, because I see we've got a minute left. But apart from that, and I'm sure everybody's got some work that we do with madrasas and young girls and young girl networks. But unfortunately, the world and young people have become so attached to social media, public individuals, and social influencers. So women like ourselves and individuals, young people, we have to act responsibly. We have to be able to present ourselves the way we would like to see our children, our grandchildren, great-grandchildren be in the future, inshallah. So it's about a daily consciousness about what we do, what we wear, what we say, how we do it. And in that way, we can influence young people. So let us make buttering bread with peanut butter and jam or cheese, let us make it fashionable. And you can find the followers of young people wanting to do that, because that's cool. It's a cool thing to be helping others. So inshallah, we find innovative, we enhance, we change the way we do things to keep up with the times. And that is it, we change. We have to keep up with the changes.
So just to add to that, Kari, with Ashraful Aid and our volunteer wing, we often try and ensure that when we do a volunteer event, we try to bring in as many kids. So we make it an activity where the kids get involved as well. And I know personally, whenever I do go out on the field, I try to take my kids along with me. I think it's just crucial for them to see how the rest of the world lives as well. And it makes them more grateful when they come home. All right, I think our time has run out. Just in closing, there's something that Maulana Suhail says to us very often when we have meetings, and he says, if your intention is correct, I've heard that word has been around the whole day, but when I'm having a stressful moment and I say to him, Maulana, I'm stressed, he says, if your intention is right, Allah will open the door. And I think in anything we do, if we wake up every morning and renew our intention, Allah will make it possible. This event has only been possible because he had a plan, an idea, and his intention, and we all just rolled with it. So Jazakallah Maulana for the opportunity as well, and thank you for listening. I know it's late in the day, but we appreciate you.
Jazakallah. Assalamu alaikum.
Jazakallah.
There's one more question. Jazakallah.